All right, we're going to continue our look at the rise and the beginning of World War I. And we're going to make the connection between how the war actually began, what is the start of the war in Europe, because keep in mind that the war and fighting's already been going on in the Pacific Theater since earlier in the early 30s. But we're going to look at that connection between appeasement and the rise of the war, and how historians have argued that appeasement was part of the lead up to war. We left off talking about the German Soviet non-aggression pact that was put together between Hitler and Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union and the leader of Germany, respectively. Even though they came from very different ideological backgrounds, what we see here is that they're agreeing not to fight. And of course, this worried everyone. But it was only about a week before the war began in Europe, and then people really kind of began to see what was going on with this German-Soviet non-aggression pact. The start of the war in Europe, keeping in mind that it's been going on in Asia as Japan has invaded the mainland and is invading other areas throughout the Pacific, the war begins in Europe on September 1st, 1939. That comes with the invasion of Poland. Hitler, like other areas like the Rhineland, like Austria, like Czechoslovakia, had argued that territory that had been taken away from Germany in the Treaty of Versailles deserved to be part of Germany again, and that people that lived in those territories that were German-speaking peoples deserved to be part of a German nation. Part of Poland that had been added to by the Treaty of Versailles did take territory away from Germany, and Hitler used this as a reason to invade. Now, he thought after the Munich conference that the Allies and the League of Nations would do nothing about this. The Allies had done nothing about the occupation of the Rhineland. They'd done nothing about the Anschluss in the annexation of Austria. They'd done nothing. They'd basically handed over the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia to Hitler. So he thought that he could invade Poland. The invasion came very quickly in what became known as Blitzkrieg in Germany, or lightning war. This is a fast attack, trying to avoid the issues of trench warfare in World War I, where things bogged down, and of course the casualty rates were very, very high, and the war moved very slowly. Instead, Blitzkrieg was designed to move and invade a country very quickly. So what the Germans did is they would bomb. They started bombing early in September 1st of 1939. Behind that becomes armored divisions. Behind armored divisions goes mobile infantry, and behind infantry, slow-moving infantry. All along, as soon as the slow-moving infantry occupied territory, the bombings and the heavy armors moving ahead. And so Poland falls relatively quickly. It's a poorer country than Germany was in 1939. It was more rural than Germany, had less industry, and it wasn't able to stand up against the large German military that Hitler and the Nazis had built up. This was the final straw for the Allies, and France and Great Britain declared war on Germany because of this action. The other thing that was interesting was once Hitler moved on Poland, he didn't consume all of Poland. He actually took the western half. And after his invasion of Poland September 1st, 1939, the Soviet Union then moved on the western half, and Poland ceased to exist. Half of it becoming part of the Soviet Union, half of it becoming part of Germany. So the fear really was, in September 1939, that somehow, because of the German-Soviet non-aggression pact, that the Germans and the Soviets were somehow in this together, in cahoots, and had planned out this division of Poland. And here we could see the Blitzkrieg attack on Poland. On the right, you can see the attack coming from the USSR, the German attack, and you can see the movement of Germans in the division of Poland. After the division of Poland, nothing really happens for a little while, several months actually, and what becomes known as the phony war. Everyone thought if war were to come back to Europe, it was going to be horrendous, like World War I again. It was something that people were trying to avoid an appeasement for a very long time. And war was declared, and then Germany did nothing. Instead of Blitzkrieg, people refer to it as Sitzenkrieg. People were sitting around. And so this phony war, the French were waiting for an invasion from Germany, but nothing had happened. If you look on the map below, you can see the borderland of France and Germany. And perhaps one of the more important reasons for studying history is to kind of remember trends that happen to nations in history. The French really believed that an invasion was going to happen across the German-French border. It's very surprising that they believed that, because in World War I, the Schlieffen Plan had created an invasion through Belgium, through neutral Belgium into France behind the main forces. What the French had done in the lead up to World War II is they built up a series of fortifications, what they felt were kind of futuristic new fortifications and very modern fortifications, cannons and bunkers and all these sorts of things to hold off a main German invasion across the border. Strange, because just decades before the Germans had invaded through Belgium. Same thing happens when the Germans decide to invade France. So this Maginot Line, the French kind of put all their eggs into that basket. Well, the phony war breaks with the invasion of Denmark and then into Norway. Then the Germans are going to move on to the Netherlands up here. Then, lo and behold, they move their main forces through Belgium and into France. A small force is thrown at the Maginot Line. The main force comes through Belgium and into France behind the Maginot Line. So essentially the French had put all their eggs in that basket, and the Germans had moved in behind that. France falls very quickly. It doesn't last through the month of May, and Paris is taken within weeks of an invasion of France, and France falls. Half of France becomes a puppet regime known as the Vichy government. It's in the south, and so the government that's put there is just friendly to the Nazis, and the other half becomes occupied France, which is directly occupied by the Germans and the French. And so quickly, no sooner really than the French had engaged in war with Germany that they're fallen. So this is very different than World War I, where the French had held off the Germans for years and they fought on the Western Front in a stalemate. France, instead, in World War II, is quickly removed from this war, at least its government. Now, its government in exile attempts to mount a resistance, what becomes known as the French resistance against the Germans. And some French fighters continue to fight. Charles de Gaulle sets up this government in exile, and French fighters fight a guerrilla war against Hitler and the Nazis to try to weaken them. But in the end, France is out. So now what we're left with in the war in Europe is, for the Allies, not much. By the end of the summer of 1941, most of Europe has fallen to Germany. Germany had occupied Poland, it's occupied Norway, it's occupied Denmark, it's occupied the Netherlands, Belgium, now it's taken out France, it's allied with Italy, it's got a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. So by the summer of 1941, by the summer of 1940 rather, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. By the summer of 1940, the Germans seem to have almost won this war. Only Great Britain really stood in its way in Europe. On the other side of the globe, in the Pacific theater, Japan is waging a ruthless campaign against China. China is fighting back, but keep in mind, China, unlike Japan, the Meiji Restoration, had not gone through industrialization. So China leans heavily on its population numbers. But in reality, it's losing that war. So by 1940, it appears the Axis powers are, for the most part, unstoppable. So Hitler decides to take out Great Britain. The problem with attacking and taking out Great Britain is that Great Britain is, in fact, an island, as we all know. And to invade England and Great Britain would involve a large amphibious invasion, which is very difficult to do. So Hitler instead tries to weaken and hopefully bring Great Britain to its knees through bombing campaigns. They send the German Luftwaffe, which means the German Air Force, to conduct massive bombing campaigns, what becomes known as the Battle of Britain, which lasted from the summer of 1940 to roughly the summer of 1941. So that first real full year of the war from 40 to 41, we see bombing campaigns of Great Britain. And the Royal Air Force was really Great Britain's only defense. Luckily, the new technology of radar allowed them to track German planes and scramble fighters. But what kept Great Britain going was fighter attacks against bombing campaigns to try to limit the damage against the Germans. By the time we get close to the spring of 1941, what we're going to find is that Hitler gets desperate. And he starts bombing London itself, and what becomes known as the London Blitz. He really instead wanted to break the will of the population, and hopefully that the British people would push their government into surrendering, and yet they didn't. So when I return on Monday, we'll listen to a few speeches by Prime Minister Winston Churchill regarding this time, and we'll talk about the resiliency of the British in this time period when people were being bombed. I mean, and during the London Blitz, part of the Battle of Britain, every night, you'd have to turn off all the lights in the city, and people would go into the underground, which is their subway, or the basements, and anywhere they could get shelter as the air sirens went off and bombs were dropped. It was a horrifying experience. Early on in the war, we also see fighting occurring in North Africa. By the end of 1941, the United States will be entering the war in December of 1941. By 1942, the United States and Great Britain launch a counteroffensive against the Germans. Their first attack, their desire was to attack North Africa, which the Germans had occupied, and hopefully attack through Italy and take Italy out of the war, and the eventual plan was to take on Germany. North Africa is liberated with some success. As you see in this picture, on the left is the German General Erwin Rommel, perhaps the greatest general of the war, unfortunately for everybody, fighting on the German side. He mounted the defense of North Africa. And so taking North Africa and then moving on to Italy was a very, very arduous and difficult task. Side note of history, Erwin Rommel actually will end up having to be forced to kill himself for his involvement in an attempt to assassinate Hitler using a bomb in a briefcase. Rommel felt that Hitler was destroying Germany, and his leadership in the war was inept. He got caught up in this conspiracy, and Hitler gave him the choice of suicide, which comes out years later. However, Hitler's greatest mistake is going to be, as you read in your book, his invasion in the German invasion of the Soviet Union. The Battle of Britain in the London Blitz became very aggravating for the Germans and Hitler. They never really understood how much damage they were actually doing to the Royal Air Force. The Royal Air Force was making an amazing stance against the German Luftwaffe, but their numbers and their bases were dwindling, and the Germans don't seem to really have understood that. So right at a time when the British Air Force was seemingly starting to break, all of a sudden Hitler, through his own leadership of the war, goes against his generals, turns his attention away from Great Britain, and decides now is the time to break the Soviet Non-Aggression Pact and attack the Soviet Union. And they do that on June 22nd, 1941, in what becomes known as Operation Barbarossa, named after the great German Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, the Third Crusade. This invasion goes quickly as the Germans move very fast into Russia, and the Russians, the Red Army, falls back, and the Germans move deeper into Russia, and the Red Army falls back. And it seems very reminiscent of Napoleon's invasion of Russia, and perhaps Hitler should have read his history books, because the Russians pursue the same defense that they pursued with Napoleon, and that was the scorched earth policy. They were destroying the fields and everything that would support the Germans, and then they were falling back deeper and deeper into Russia. Then the Germans got bogged down in two large battles, one at Leningrad, which was the name that Petrograd was changed to, or St. Petersburg, and the other one at Stalingrad, which you can see to the south. This becomes the turning point of the war in the Soviet Union. I want you to keep one thing in mind when we're talking about the war with the Russians between the Germans. In the European theater of World War II, most of the fighting and most of the dying occurs between the Germans and the Red Army, the Soviet Red Army. There is certainly a lot of fighting going on in the West, but most of it is going on in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union loses millions of citizens in this fight, in this stance, and a large destruction to their infrastructure and their cities. And they're really going to be the ones that bog down most of those German troops. So we'll pick up on this invasion in just a minute. We'll finish up. And we'll leave off, and of course, as always, I'll leave you some sources and some things to work on these topics.